Rain fell hard on the battlefield. The ground was broken with mud and blood. Fires burned in the distance where machines had died. The war between humans and aliens had ended for the night, but the cruelty of victory was not finished. She was dragged forward in heavy chains. Her purple skin was bruised, her long hair wet and clinging to her face. The soldiers laughed as they pulled her through the mud, calling her a spoil of war. To them, she was not a person, she was a trophy. They pushed her to the center of the camp. Torches lit the area. Shadows of men stretched across the wet ground. One soldier shouted that she should be given away. "Who will take her? She is worthless," he mocked. The others laughed, their eyes cruel, their voices sharp. But among them stood a man who did not laugh. He was silent, watching her with eyes that were different from the rest. His face carried no joy, no hatred, only a strange sadness. When the commander ordered, "Give her to him," the camp roared with laughter. They thought it was a joke, a punishment, a way to shame him. The chains were thrown into his hands. She fell to her knees before him, her body trembling. She did not look up, because she expected the same cruelty. All her life, she had seen humans destroy her people, burn her villages, take her sisters away. Now she was certain she would face the same fate. But the man said nothing. He only pulled her gently up from the mud. His touch was not like the others. There was no hunger in it, no cruelty. Only a quiet strength. The soldiers laughed louder, shouting that he should enjoy his prize. But he ignored them. He took her to his tent. Inside there was a small fire burning, giving weak light. He placed food and water near her, but did not touch her. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. Her chains clinked with every movement. She did not eat, thinking. It was a trick. The man sat across the fire, his eyes never leaving her face. For a long time, there was only silence and the sound of rain on the tent. Finally, he spoke one word, slow and careful. "Eat," he said, pointing to the food. His voice was low, calm, not sharp like the others. She looked at him with fear, but also with confusion. Why would an enemy give her food? She touched the bread with weak fingers. It was warm, real, not poisoned. Slowly, she began to eat, her eyes never leaving him. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks as she swallowed. It was the first kindness she had been shown since her capture. Outside, the soldiers laughed and drank. They told stories about battles and mocked the man who now had the alien girl. They said he was a fool. They said he would regret taking her. But inside the tent, the air was different. It was not laughter, not cruelty, but a strange silence that held weight. She tried to speak in her own language, her voice broken. He shook his head, not understanding. Then he pointed to himself and said his name slowly. She repeated it, her accent rough, but he nodded. Then he pointed to her and waited. She gave her name, weak and soft. For the first time, someone listened to it. For the first time, her name was not shouted as a curse, but spoken as something real. The night grew darker. The rain outside became heavier. She lay near the fire, her chains still heavy on her wrists and ankles. She thought of running, but her body was too weak. She thought of fighting, but his eyes stopped her. They were not the eyes of an enemy. They were the eyes of someone who carried pain. What pain, she did not know, but it made her heart hesitate. The man did not sleep. He sat with his sword near his side, his eyes fixed on the fire. He was guarding her, though she could not understand why. When she finally closed her eyes, the last thing she saw was his face in the glow of the fire. And for the first time since her capture, she slept without fear. But outside the tent, whispers grew. Other soldiers wanted her. They did not like that one man kept her for himself. They planned, they waited, and they would strike soon. The gift of chains was not finished. Her story had only just begun. The camp was quiet under the heavy rain. Most soldiers were drunk or asleep. But inside one tent, two lives sat on opposite sides of a dying fire. The alien girl hugged her knees, her chains biting into her skin. The human man sat with his sword by his side, his eyes fixed on the flames. She did not understand why he had not touched her. Every other man in the camp had looked at her with hunger or cruelty, but this one was different. He gave her food, gave her water, and then kept his distance. It was strange, it was confusing, and it frightened her in a new way. When the fire cracked, she flinched. Her whole body was trained to expect pain. She turned her face away so he would not see her tears. But he noticed. His voice came quiet, steady, a single word in his language. "Safe," he said, pointing to the ground, then to her. She did not know the word, but she felt the meaning. It was a promise, though promises meant little in war. The night passed slowly. She tried to stay awake, watching him. At times his eyes closed, but every sound outside made him tense again. She realized he was not sleeping because of her. He was watching over her, protecting her, even from the men in his own camp. By morning, the rain had not stopped. The camp smelled of smoke, wet earth, and blood. The soldiers woke and began their loud games again, but whispers followed her everywhere. They looked at her with cruel smiles, waiting. She heard laughter, she heard her name twisted into curses, and yet, the man did not let anyone near her. Later, he brought her out of the tent. Chains still heavy on her wrists, she walked beside him, the mud sucked at her feet, her hair clung to her face. The other soldiers pointed, mocking both of them. "Look at the pet," one said. "Teach her tricks," another laughed, but the man ignored them. His silence was louder than their laughter. He led her to a small stream near the edge of camp. The water was cold, clear, running fast. He knelt and dipped his hands into it, drinking. Then he pointed for her to do the same. She hesitated, waiting for a trick. But when nothing happened, she bent down. Her chains rattled as she touched the water. For the first time since her capture, she felt clean drops on her skin. It reminded her of home, of rivers she once played in before the war. She drank carefully, watching him. His face was hard, serious, but not cruel. When he looked at her, it was as if he saw a person, not a prize, and that thought made her chest feel strange. Hope was dangerous, she told herself. Hope could kill faster than hunger, but she could not stop it from growing. That night, the campfire burned again. The man placed food before her, bread and a small piece of meat. She hesitated, then whispered in her own tongue, "Why?" He did not understand, but his eyes softened. He pointed at the food, then at her, then at himself. Sharing, he seemed to mean, not command, not ownership, but something equal. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. Her body still shook with fear, but less than before. And then something strange happened. He took a stick and drew in the dirt. A simple shape, a circle. He pointed to it and spoke a word. She tilted her head, not understanding. Again he repeated, pointing, saying the word slower. She realized he was teaching her human words. Her mouth shaped the sound, clumsy, broken, but real. He nodded, smiling just a little. The first smile she had seen from him. It was not cruel, not mocking. It was almost gentle. And for a moment, he forgot the chains, forgot the war. She was just a girl learning a word from someone who did not hate her. Outside the tent, the laughter grew louder. Other soldiers whispered of taking her. They did not like that she was with him. They said he was weak, that he was wasting a gift. They said no alien deserved kindness, but he ignored them all. Night after night, he guarded her, and slowly her fear began to break. Yet in her heart she knew danger was near. Kindness was rare and kindness was hated. The men would not let this continue forever. One night, she woke to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. Voices whispered, low and angry. Her heart pounded as she looked to the man. He already had his sword in his hand. He was ready, for her, for the danger that was coming. And she realized something new. He was not only her captor, he was her shield. But how long could one shield hold back an entire army? The night was heavy with whispers. The alien girl sat close to the fire inside the tent, her chains cold against her skin. She could feel danger outside, like wolves circling in the dark. The man sharpened his sword in silence, the scraping sound mixing with the falling rain. He knew what the whispers meant. Soon, others would come for her. In the camp, soldiers had grown restless. They drank, they laughed, but their eyes kept turning to the tent. Some said the girl should belong to all of them. Others said she should be sold or used until she was nothing. The idea that one man kept her for himself filled them with anger. They saw it as weakness. They saw it as betrayal. That night, when the fire burned low, the first shadow moved. The girl heard boots in the mud, soft but many. Her heart raced. She gripped her chains, eyes wide in fear. The man raised a hand, signaling for her to stay quiet. He stepped outside, his sword in his grip. 4 soldiers stood waiting, their faces drunk with wine and hunger. "We came for her," one said. "She is not yours alone." Another growled. The man stood tall, rain running down his face. "She is not yours," he answered, his voice steady. The soldiers laughed, their blades shining in the torchlight. "You think you can keep her? She is nothing but a spoil of war." But the man shook his head, his eyes hard. "She is not a spoil," he said. The fight came fast, steel clashed, sparks flew. The girl crawled to the tent's entrance, her breath frozen in her chest. She saw him fight against men who were once his brothers in arms. Mud splashed, rain fell harder, their boots sank into the earth as they swung and struck. One man tried to reach the tent, but her protector cut him down with a single blow. Another lunged, blade flashing, but the man blocked it, his strength pushing the soldier back. The girl's eyes widened as she saw blood spill into the mud. It was not her blood this time, but his. A cut across his arm, another on his cheek. Yet he did not fall. He fought like a man with something more important than his life. He fought for her. The soldiers cursed, anger growing with each strike. One shouted that no alien was worth dying for. Another screamed that the man had betrayed his kind, but he did not answer. His sword was his answer. His shield was his answer. Every move he made spoke louder than words. The girl trembled, torn between fear and something new. No one had ever fought for her before. Her people had been taken, broken, sold like objects, and now this man, a human, bled for her. Why, she wondered. Why would he do this? The last soldier fell, clutching his side, groaning in the mud. The man stood breathing heavy, rain dripping from his hair, blood mixing with water. The camp had fallen silent, the laughter replaced with cold fear. The other soldiers who had watched from the shadows now stepped back. They had seen enough. They had seen that he was willing to kill his own kind to protect her. He returned to the tent, his steps heavy, his sword red. She backed away in fear at first, but then froze when she saw his eyes. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were tired, pained, but still gentle when they turned to her. He dropped the sword beside the fire and sat down, his body shaking. The girl crawled closer, her chains dragging through the dirt. For the first time she touched him, her hands, small and trembling, pressed against the cut on his arm. He looked at her, surprised. In her broken voice, she whispered her word for thank you. He did not understand her language, but he understood the meaning. For a moment, the war outside did not matter. For a moment, it was only the fire, the rain, and two enemies who were no longer enemies. But the danger had not passed. The soldiers would not forgive him. Whispers spread like fire through the camp. They called him a traitor, a fool, a man blinded by the touch of an alien. They said he would be punished, and the girl knew, if they stayed, both of them would die. That night, while the camp still stirred with anger, the man tightened the straps of his armor. He picked up his sword, then looked at her. His hand reached out, not to command, but to invite. She stared at it, her heart beating fast. If she took it, there would be no turning back. If she refused, she would remain in chains forever. Her fingers slowly touched his hand. The chains clinked, heavy and cold. But her choice was clear. She would go with him, even if it meant running into darkness, even if it meant the whole world would hunt them. And so, as the campfires burned and the whispers grew louder, the man and the alien girl slipped away into the night. Together, hunted by all, but bound by something stronger than war, something neither of them could yet name. The night was heavy with rain. The campfires burned low, and the voices of the soldiers had grown quiet, but danger still filled the air. The man knew they could not stay. Too many eyes had seen his fight. Too many whispers called him traitor. At dawn, the commander would demand his head, and the girl would be dragged away again. He packed quickly, only what he could carry. A blade, a flask of water, a few pieces of bread. The alien girl watched him, her chains clinking with every movement. She did not understand all of his words, but she understood his eyes. He was telling her they had to go. She felt fear, but also a strange spark of hope. To run was dangerous. To stay was death. The camp was surrounded by guards. Soldiers dozed in the rain, their spears leaning against their shoulders. Horses shifted in the mud, restless, sensing the tension of men who waited for dawn. The man pulled the girl close, placing a hand over her lips. She nodded, understanding the need for silence. They slipped out the back of the tent, their steps quiet on the wet ground. The world beyond the camp was black. Tall trees swayed in the storm, their branches shaking under the weight of water. The forest stretched wide, endless, full of shadows and secrets. The man led her forward, every sense sharp. Behind them, the camp still burned with torchlight. Ahead, only darkness waited. They walked fast, the girl stumbling on roots and rocks. Her chains slowed her, her feet bare and cold. Several times she fell, but he always pulled her back to her feet. Each time she expected anger, but he only gave her strength. When they reached a ridge, they looked back. The camp was small now, but movement stirred. Voices, shouts, men running. The alarm had been raised. The girl's chest tightened with fear. She knew the punishment for betrayal. The humans would hunt him down like an animal, and her fate would be worse. Still, the man did not stop. He gripped her hand, his voice low, you. Urging her forward, they ran into the forest, their breaths sharp, their hearts pounding. Torches flared behind them. The soldiers had seen their trail. The forest echoed with the sound of men shouting, dogs barking, boots crushing mud and leaves. The girl stumbled again, her chains dragging her down. She cried out, and the sound carried through the night. The man lifted her, pulling her onto his back, her arms wrapped around his shoulders, her chains biting into his chest. But he did not stop. He carried her through the storm. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. The forest blurred into shadows and rain. Branches scratched at their faces. Roots clawed at their feet. Yet they kept moving. When his strength began to fade, he set her down near a stream. Her breaths came fast, her eyes wide with fear. "Quiet," he whispered, pressing a finger to his lips. The sound of voices grew closer, torches glowing in the distance. They crouched in the shadows of a fallen tree. Water dripped from the branches above. The girl held her breath, her hands pressed against her chains to silence them. The soldiers passed only a few steps away, their voices angry, their dogs sniffing the ground. One dog stopped, nose lifting to the air. The girl closed her eyes, whispering a prayer in her own tongue. But then thunder cracked, shaking the forest. The dog barked, frightened, and the soldiers cursed, pulling it forward. The danger passed for now. When silence returned, the man looked at her. His face was pale with exhaustion, his body bruised and bleeding. But his eyes still carried the same fire. He touched her chains, his fingers brushing the cold metal. Then he lifted his blade. The sound of steel striking iron filled the forest as he tried to break them. The chains bent but did not break. Still, he kept striking again and again until sparks flew. At last, one of the shackles cracked, falling loose from her wrist. She gasped, staring at her hand, free for the first time in months. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered her name again, louder this time. He repeated it, clumsy but careful. Then he said his own name, slow and clear. For the first time, she said it back. Their voices were soft, lost in the storm, but the meaning was strong. They were no longer captor and captive. They were two souls running from the same enemy. As dawn began to break, light touched the forest floor. They found a cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. Inside it was cold, but dry. The man lit a small fire with shaking hands. The girl sat beside him, pulling the broken shackle from her wrist. The flames danced across their faces. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she might live. She leaned close to the fire, whispering in her own tongue. Not a curse, not a cry, but a song. Soft, broken, but filled with hope. The man listened, not understanding the words, but he felt the meaning in his chest. And in that cave, as the storm raged outside, two enemies found peace. But peace could not last. Behind them, the army still hunted, and soon, the darkness they had escaped into would test them more than chains ever could. The cave was dark except for the small fire. The rain outside fell without rest, covering the forest in a steady roar. The man sat against the wall, his sword close by, his body heavy with exhaustion. The alien girl watched him from across the fire, her chains broken but not gone. One wrist free, the other still trapped. His arm bled from the fight, the cloth around the wound already soaked. His face was pale, his breath uneven. For the first time, she saw him weak. Fear touched her heart. If he fell, if he died, she would be alone again. The soldiers would find her, and no one would stand between her and their cruelty. She moved closer to him, her hands trembling. Her people had always healed their own with herbs and song. She had. Did nothing now, no herbs, no tools, no freedom, only her will. He tried to wave her away, but she shook her head. With careful hands, she pressed cloth tighter around his arm. He hissed in pain, but did not push her back. Her fingers worked slowly, clumsy but gentle. She whispered words in her language, soft prayers she had once heard from her mother. The firelight showed her face, wet with tears but filled with determination. He watched her in silence. Her touch was not of an enemy, not of a slave. It was the touch of someone who cared. For the first time since the war began, he felt warmth that was not from fire. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, they were no longer soldier and spoil. They were simply two souls, wounded but alive. She finished tying the cloth and sat back, breathing hard. Her chains rattled against the stone floor. The sound reminded her of what she still was. But in his eyes, she saw something different. He reached out slowly and touched her wrist, not to pull her closer, not to command her, only to show he saw her. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the storm howled. But inside the cave, there was a fragile peace. The girl curled near the flames, shivering. The man took his cloak and placed it around her shoulders. She froze, shocked by the kindness. Then she pulled it close, warmth spreading through her body. No human had ever given her comfort. It felt strange, it felt dangerous, but it also felt real. As the night stretched long, he began to draw shapes in the dirt again, simple marks, circles, lines, and words in his tongue. He pointed to himself, spoke his name, and waited. She repeated it, her voice stronger this time. Then she spoke her own name, clearer than before. He repeated it, smiling just a little. The fire reflected in their eyes. Two languages met in broken pieces. Two hearts met in silence. She laughed once, softly, when he mispronounced her word. The sound startled both of them. It was the first time she had laughed since her capture. The man looked at her, his eyes softening. For a moment, the chains, the war, the fear, all of it disappeared. There was only the sound of rain, fire, and quiet laughter. But peace never lasts in times of war. By morning, the forest stirred with danger. The dogs were still hunting, the soldiers still chasing. Their voices carried on the wind, closer than before. The girl froze, fear returning. But the man placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, strong. He pointed deeper into the woods. They could not stay, not even here. She helped him stand, his body weak but unbroken. Together, they left the cave, the fire dying behind them. The forest was thick, roots twisting, branches clawing. Every sound made her jump, every shadow felt alive. But he kept moving, and she followed. When he stumbled, she pulled him forward. When she cried, he gave her strength with his eyes. By midday, they reached a clearing. Sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. It touched the wet grass, the dripping trees, and their tired faces. The girl lifted her head, feeling warmth on her skin. It reminded her of home, of fields she once ran through as a child. She closed her eyes, whispering something soft. The man listened, though he did not understand. He knew it was not a curse, not sorrow. It was hope. They rested near a fallen tree. He lay back, eyes half closed, his wounds still heavy. She sat beside him, her hand near his, but not touching. She wanted to, but fear held her back. Yet when the wind shifted and he shivered, she placed her hand over his at last. His fingers moved, weak but certain, curling around hers. The chains clinked, but the bond was stronger than iron. The girl looked at him and whispered, "Why?" Again, the same word she had asked before. This time, he did not answer with words. He only held her hand tighter. And in that silence, she began to understand the bond of fire had been made. Not by war, not by chains, not by blood, but by kindness shared in the darkest night. Still, danger was never far. The forest was full of enemies, and soon, the world would test if their fragile bond could survive. The forest did not protect them for long. By the third night, the soldiers closed in, their torches burning like angry stars between the trees. The man and the alien girl were too weak to keep running. His wounds slowed him, her chains still weighed her down. When the soldiers surrounded them, there was no escape. They were dragged back into the camp. The girl screamed, her voice raw, but no one listened. They threw her into the dirt, chaining her once more, this time with heavier iron. The man was beaten, his arms tied, his face bloodied. The commander stood before them, his eyes filled with rage. "You dare betray your own kind for this creature," he spat. "She is nothing. She is a spoil of war." The girl tried to move toward him, but the soldiers kicked her back. She cried out in her own tongue, desperate, her voice breaking. The commander laughed, lifting his sword high for all to see. "Watch," he said to the crowd. "See what happens to a traitor." The man raised his head, his eyes burning with defiance, even bloodied, even broken. He did not beg. He shouted words that made the soldiers falter. "She is not property. She is not a spoil. She is a life." The camp fell silent for a moment. The girl's heart pounded at his voice, stronger than chains, stronger than pain. The commander struck him across the face, but the man did not stop. Again he shouted, his voice louder. "You call me weak, but you are the slaves to cruelty, slaves to hate." Some soldiers looked at each other uneasily. They had never heard such words spoken in their camp. The girl's eyes filled with tears, her heart burning. No one had ever defended her with such fire. The commander roared with fury and ordered the man dragged before the fire. They tied him to a post, preparing to burn him alive. The girl fought her chains until her wrists bled, screaming his name, but the soldiers only laughed. "You will watch him die," they told her. "You will learn what happens when humans care for your kind." The fire was lit, flames rising. The heat burned against his skin, smoke filled the air. Still, he did not cry out. He looked at her, his eyes calm, as if telling her not to fear. She shook her head, tears falling. Her voice rose above the laughter, above the crackling flames. She shouted words in her tongue, words of love, words of pain. The soldiers mocked her, but some grew silent, for in her voice was something they all recognized, something human. One soldier stepped back, uncertain. Another lowered his eyes. The commander screamed at them to hold their ground, but doubt had already entered their hearts. They had seen war, they had taken spoils, but never had they seen such devotion between enemies. It unsettled them. It made them question. The girl's chains rattled as she struggled. She pulled until the iron cut deep into her flesh. Her body shook, but her will did not break. She screamed again, her voice carrying into the night, not just for him, but for freedom, for all her people who had suffered. The man's voice joined hers, weak but strong in spirit. He called out again, "She is not a spoil. She is not yours. She is free." The commander's face twisted with rage. He drew his sword, ready to silence him forever. But before he could strike, the soldiers moved. Not many, only a few, but enough to matter. One knocked the commander's blade aside. Another cut the ropes that held the man. The camp erupted in chaos, soldiers shouting, some loyal, some uncertain. The girl crawled toward him, her chains still heavy, her body trembling. He fell into her arms, weak but alive. The commander roared, swinging his sword wildly. He called the man a traitor, the girl a beast. But the firelight showed the truth. It was not chains that held power. It was not fear. It was love, burning brighter than the flames. The girl pressed her forehead against his, whispering his name. He touched her cheek with shaking hands. They were broken, hunted, and still surrounded. But in that moment, they were unafraid. The commander charged again, but more soldiers stepped in his path. The camp had split, some still blinded by hate, others shaken by what they had witnessed. In the chaos, the man and the girl were pulled away by those few who dared to defy orders. They cut her chains, at last freeing her hands. She gasped as the iron fell. The weight she had carried for so long was gone. The night became fire and smoke, screams and battle. The camp turned against itself. In the confusion, they slipped into the forest once more. The man's steps weak, her hands holding him up. Every breath burned, every shadow threatened. But they were free, if only for now. As they vanished into the trees, the girl looked back. She saw the flames rising, soldiers fighting soldiers, the commander's roar echoing through the night, and she knew the war was no longer just about land or power. It was about something greater. The price of love had been paid in blood, and the world would never be the same again. The forest burned behind them, smoke rose into the night sky, orange flames painting the trees with fire. The man and the owl. Iron Girl stumbled through the darkness, his wounds heavy, her body weak from chains, but their hands were locked together and neither let go. For days they walked, hiding from soldiers who searched the woods. Every sound made them freeze, every shadow made them fear, but they kept moving because turning back meant death. At night they slept beneath broken branches. At day they followed rivers deeper into unknown lands. The man grew weaker, his blood loss slowing him. The girl refused to leave him, even when he told her to run. Her answer was always the same. A shake of her head, eyes filled with fire. She would not abandon him. One morning, they reached the edge of the forest. Before them stretched open fields, green and wide under a gray sky. But beyond the fields, drums echoed. The war had not ended. Two armies prepared to clash once more. The humans on one side, the aliens on the other. The girl's heart sank. If they crossed into the fields, they would be caught between both. If they stayed, the soldiers hunting them would find them. There was no safe path. The man leaned against a rock, his breath shallow. He looked at her, his lips cracked, his voice weak. "Go," he whispered. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I stay," she said in broken words she had learned from him. He tried to smile, but pain pulled at his face. "You must live," he whispered, but she touched his hand and spoke in her tongue, firm and strong. "No, we live." The sound of war grew louder. Trumpets called, banners lifted, soldiers marched. The girl felt her heart break. She had lost everything once, her home, her people, her freedom. Now she faced losing him too. She could not let that happen. Not again. She rose, pulling him with her. Step by step, they moved toward the battlefield. The soldiers on both sides turned in surprise. A human soldier and an alien girl walking together, holding hands. The crowd of warriors paused, their shouts fading into silence. It was a sight no one had expected. The commander of the humans stepped forward, his face twisted with fury. "There," he shouted. "The traitor and his beast." On the alien side, voices rose, calling her a shame, a slave, a broken one. The girl lifted her chin, her voice shaking but loud. "No," she cried. Her words were broken human tongue, but strong enough to carry. "I am not spoil. I am not beast. I am life." The soldiers murmured, shifting uneasily. The man, though weak, raised his sword. He pointed it not at the humans, not at the aliens, but at the sky. "No more chains," he shouted. "No more war." The commander roared, ordering his men to attack. But many soldiers hesitated. They had seen the fire in the girl's eyes, the wounds on the man's body. They had seen devotion stronger than hate. And in that moment, doubt spread like wildfire. The first clash came fast, steel against steel, cries across the field. But not all fought. Some dropped their weapons, refusing to raise them. Some turned their blades not on enemies but on commanders who forced them to kill. Chaos filled the air. The war cracked, splintered, broke apart. The man fell to his knees, too weak to fight more. The girl caught him, holding his face between her hands. Her tears fell on his skin, mixing with blood and dirt. She whispered his name over and over. Around them, men and women fought, shouted, fled. But in that small space, there was only the two of them. "Live," he whispered again. She shook her head, pressing her forehead against his. "Together," she said, her voice fierce. In that moment, strength surged in her heart. She rose, lifting his arm over her shoulder. Step by step, she carried him away from the battle, through smoke, through blood, through cries of war, until the sounds grew faint. At last they reached the far side of the fields. The forest ahead was untouched by fire, green and quiet. They collapsed among the trees, their breaths shaking, their bodies broken, but they were alive. The girl held him close, whispering in her tongue. Her words were a promise, that chains would never touch her again, that war would not define her life, that love was stronger than hate. The dawn rose, painting the sky with gold. The battlefield behind them still burned. But in the forest ahead, a new path waited. Not spoil and master, not human and alien, but two souls who had chosen each other. The girl pressed her forehead to his and whispered one last word: free. And together, they stepped into the light, not as enemies, not as captor and captive, but as equals, as survivors, as the beginning of something greater than war.